About data. Each week, host Eric Kavanaugh interviews the brightest minds in the world of information management. Want to be on a show? Send an email to info@dmradio.biz. Now, here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the longest running show in the world about data. It's called DM Radio. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here. And the topic for today is a fun one. It's an open-ended topic. We're going to talk about how it's just the beginning and why data drives success. We've got a couple great guests lined up for you today. My old buddy Joe Gaska from Grax is here. And we've got Daasity Dan as well from Daasity. So we're going to be hearing from him. And we'll talk all about everything from data management to backup to information strategy, artificial intelligence. Of course, ChatGPT keeps coming up in conversations, and for good reason. It's incredibly powerful technology. We had a guest on a couple of weeks ago that said they used ChatGPT to optimize their HTML tags on their website to improve conversion, and it worked. And what's fun, I was just chatting with our guests in the green room, if you will, before the show. And I mentioned that if you think about it, ChatGPT, of course, can write sonnets, it can write poems, it can write tweets, it can write essays. And that's with a corpus of words known as the English language. And I'm pretty sure it works in other languages as well. So if you think about how machine data works, the kinds of things that machines tell each other to run your business, to run your marketing, to run sales automation or whatever, that's a lot less complex, I would reckon, than knowing an entire language like English. And of course, computer programs are written in software languages like Java and C++, Scala, etc. So bottom line is that ChatGPT is going to get into the coding game, at least to some extent, and that is going to be interesting. But first, let's bring in Daasity Dan. I love that name, by the way. I love your moniker, Daasity Dan. It cracks me up. It's good stuff. It's got good alliteration. It's fun, and it rhymes with Cassidy, right? Like we were joking earlier. But you've built a really interesting data and analytics platform. Tell us about it, where it came from, and what it does.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So, Daasity, we are an ELT platform for consumer brands. So we help consumer brands access all of the data across all the different channels that they sell, whether they're digital, like you've got a store on Shopify or BigCommerce, you might be selling on all Amazon or maybe Walmart.com, and then your retail. And if you're selling in wholesale, so retailers like a Nordstrom, Sephora, Ulta, if you're in kind of the beauty space, we bring in all that data, all the marketing data, operations data to really help you run your business and have really the ability to make data-driven decisions faster. And so it's all about this. How do you access data to make you smarter and more intelligent?
Well, you know what's interesting? I've tracked this industry now for, I'm afraid to admit, 23 years or so. So a pretty long time I've been focused on data and analytics, business intelligence, as we called it. And if you look at the evolution of the industry and the evolution of data warehouses, of business intelligence, data visualization, all these things, you had all these discrete technologies, like you got your Teradata data warehouse, you have some BI tool maybe that sits on top of that. And you had this whole string of technologies you'd bring together, and they all matured in their own way. But then, the cloud comes along, and cloud, what should we call it these days? 3.0, basically. And you can reinvent everything. So at a certain point, what was great 10 years ago becomes technical debt. And what's great today is orders of magnitude better than what we had 5 and 10 years ago. And it seems to me like that's the recognition that you made, was that, look, we can build an analytics stack from the ground up using these modern technologies, these modern scale out technologies, many of which are open source, and create a brand new mousetrap, right?
Absolutely. I got started actually working in consumer brands at a company called Pro Flowers. And when I joined, I was asked to go build out their analytics infrastructure. And I think we spent millions of dollars because, going back to that old technology that you had, we had an on-prem database, a very expensive, high-end analytics database. We had to develop a lot of our own coding to kind of extract the data. Now you can turn around and start a business online for next to nothing. And because everything's cloud-based, it's so cheap to be able to extract that data, go have it in some sort of cloud analytics platform like us. And so what used to cost you millions of dollars, you can now do for hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars. And so it's really kind of allowed people to have really democratized data is what it's done. Now everybody can have it. It's not just the Fortune 500 companies that are sophisticated and have lots of cash that have the ability to use data to help their business.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Why don't you talk a bit about what companies are able to do? Because if you're running analytics, you're talking about consumer brands, you're talking about SKUs and locations and pricing and marketing programs and all these things. And anyone in the consumer packaged goods industry, like who works for stores, like retail stores, knows that where you place things, when you place things, where you place things next to, all that stuff really matters. Are those the kind of things you can optimize with these analytics?
Absolutely. The power and the type of information that you can get is so incredible. So we've known that for a long time in the digital world where we track your browsing behavior. We know where you've gone on a site. We now know how you've interacted with the site and what you're going to purchase. And you see a lot of that in the digital space, but it's really cool because you're now starting to see that within the retail space as well. So we connect to platforms that measure traffic going in and out of stores. There are companies out there that in their own stores are putting RFID tags on their clothing so they can see what's being picked up and moved around and track it. And it's almost like you imagine online, I can see where everybody clicks and I can see the products and how they're interacting and where conversion and make decisions really quickly about moving things up and down on the site. And now I can do that in my store in a real time. Should I put the clothing where it is? What's selling quickly? What's not? Do I move it around? Am I converting well? There are platforms at that allow you to track traffic in and out. And if I know how many people are in the store and how many are buying, I have a sense of which stores convert better. And so I can do really sophisticated analytics that I couldn't do 5-10 years ago because of the availability of all this information and all these platforms that have come out and really made tracking information really available.
Well, and you know what's really cool about this, and I'll bring in Joe here in just a minute, is that you can correlate data from systems, right? So you got all your CRM data, for example, you can do some analysis of market conditions or whatever. But when you add this element of RFID tags, as you suggest, in the corporeal world, where you can see things moving around, you can really start to triangulate on what the meaningful signal is on this product or that product. Because like that's half the challenge in retail is knowing what to have in the store, where to have it, and then of course how to price that stuff. And when you can really view it from multiple different angles and build this picture of what's happening in your business, that's a very compelling story, right, Dan?
It's hugely important. And it's super important in when you're thinking about businesses that sell in multiple places. So, you might take your favorite food product and say, I can buy it online, I can buy it in the grocery store, and I can buy it at Costco. And what happens, usually these businesses, you've got somebody over here who manages the Costco relationship and somebody who manages, say, the grocery, and then you've got somebody who manages it on Amazon. And what happens when it goes on sale in Costco and you're the consumer? Do you go buy it at Costco? You saw it for a couple of dollars less. Are you going to end up buying it online? Probably not. And so you get into this kind of internal battle within the company of, well, I did better than this channel, but really, what does the owner care about? The owner cares about what are my total sales and how am I doing across the board? And that's really what this ability to see holistically and have all the data come in from all the different places and be stored in one central system. That's what's so important, is getting a 360-degree view of really what's going on.
Yeah, and one last question before I bring Joe in here. One of the challenges of all these web-based systems is they all have their own data models, they all have their own APIs, they all have their own DNA, and it's wildly different from one to the next. And of course, sometimes APIs can be deprecated. I heard that just happened with HubSpot, which kind of blew my mind. But I think that it's just that APIs are now starting to get played around with some of the bad guys. There's some security concerns apparently. So OAuth is one of the new ways to connect these things. But what have you done to be able to allow companies to quickly take this unwieldy data from marketing systems, sales automation, ERP, all these things? What have you done to be able to quickly enable that to be grabbed and immersed into your environment and then made usable quickly? How do you do that?
Yeah, for us, one of the big things is we only work with consumer brands, and that makes it a lot easier for us because every consumer brand, whether you're billions of dollars or you're $1 million in sales, you're all trying to answer the same types of questions. And so what we've done is said, a customer purchasing an order, it doesn't matter what system you're using. The concept of that structure is exactly the same. You're a customer, you've bought something, you have these things in your cart, and that philosophy doesn't matter, is the same regardless of whether you bought on Amazon, you bought online, or you went into a physical store and purchased that and you got a transaction receipt. And so what we do is we map everything into what we call these unified schemas to really make it easy for you to sell anywhere. Because you're right, every company out there that has some sort of system where you can buy something, the way that they store the data and send the data is completely different. And so that's where we come in, is we map everything and we put it into one sort of central unified logic that makes it very easy to then go and build your analytics.
That's very cool. It's very clever. Well, let's bring in our other friend here today, Joseph Gaska from Grax. Welcome back to DM Radio. Tell us what's going on with you and what you think about unlocking all this data from lots of different sources. It's been a dream for years. For years, I've wanted to be able to do that, and we're finally doing it. What do you think, Joe?
It has. Thanks again for having us on, Eric. Joe Gaska with Grax, Data Lifecycle Management Platform. So when we really started Grax, we think of historical data and backup recovery as a tactical obligation, right? So I have to back it up in case something bad happens. I'm very fearful that something accidentally is happening. So when Grax started and it's really about protecting people's historical data, and if they want to recover from their historical data. But as Moore's law has driven down the cost of storage and the power of computing has really increased, so has the possibilities of what to do with that historical data. As Dan was saying, historical buying patterns, people using data, learning from their history. If we really think about what's going on, as you mentioned ChatGPT early on, right? If you think of knowledge and intelligence typically come from learning from historical data and patterns.
Right.
And it's across everywhere. Buying patterns, as Dan was saying, whether I go into one store, once a week, twice a week and whatnot, buying. Same with enterprise data. Enterprise data like Salesforce.com, if you think of how their data change, also really instructs the business on what and how to optimize my business to sell more, or greenfields, or understand their customers. So historical data is incredibly powerful. So what once was before, I want to buy insurance, I want to buy historical protection, 100% of all of our customers' data is replicated to their cloud that they own. So imagine that every version, every piece of data, everything within their enterprise systems replicated down to their storage that they own. As the prevalence of AI and machine learning grows, so does the thirst for historical data to train it or learn from it or even back test. If you think of in the financial worlds, right? The one big powerful place that the financial world has is historical data to back test all of their models as their models change.
Right.
Right.
Interesting.
So that's really where we really are seeing, not only as analytics, if we really think the world today, and when we work with analytics, like Dan was saying, analytics visualizations always starts with a question I want to ask and an answer I want to get. Right, just like you saw with as you said again, the ChatGPT thing, you're asking it questions and getting answers. That's really what people want to do with their historical data. now. It's becoming super interesting, the possibilities out there.
How
With different
interesting.
technologies.
Yeah, and so I played around with ChatGPT a little bit, and I know they do have some tools. And I just saw on LinkedIn moments ago that Microsoft is rolling out ChatGPT inside of Teams, which is a pretty clever move. And you start talking about being able to train an AI like that on your data, pointed at all of your historical data, then you can start really opening up the interactive query capability of your environment, right? You could ask it, hey, tell me what are the three top most interesting segments that we've marketed to in the last year. It'll come back, millennials who live in Detroit, or old people who live in, Pittsburgh or something like that. That's a very different dynamic from what we're used to in the analytics world, where you're like typing SQL queries and things of that nature. I think it's going to make this whole analytics business just explode. What do you think?
Not only that, if you go even one step further, so if they can identify patterns and suggest ideas of what to do, why not have them just do it for you? If they discover that, hey, here's an opportunity that you could sell more to this demographic, oh, we should send them an email and then we should follow up with them. It's really an interesting thing when you start thinking of how much all of this data comes, and every time one of these new technologies come, the hunger and thirst for historical and data more to train these models, back test them, and it really becomes incredibly important. So we really have been super excited about, obviously all of us are here because we're data nerds, and I love it. I can't help it, but it's the historical data and what you can get from it now is just unbelievable. It's not just, hey, build me this cool chart that someone then could interpret and actually suggest what they should do. But now
Right.
these things are really saying, like, here, based on this is really what we think you should do with this historical data.
I mean, that really is wild. I mean, you're talking about using an AI to, number one, analyze your data, like your historical data, but then number two, take action and go do stuff for you. I mean, we already see this. I remember Google a couple of years ago started in Gmail automatically surfacing emails that it thought was important for you, things that maybe you should follow up on. And I thought it was very good. I mean, I was surprised at how good a job it did at surfacing the right ones. And then it kind of went away. So I don't know if I just forgot to check some box, or I should look back into whatever the hell happened. But it's been around for a while, but now it's really getting to a level of maturity that is game changing, and it's going to be very, very good for the people who use it, and not very good for the people who don't use it. But folks, don't touch that dial. I'll be right back. You are listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, we're talking to Joe Gaska from Grax and Daasity Dan LeBlanc from Daasity, all about how data is driving everything. We were just chatting about ChatGPT and how it's changing things. And really, I'll throw it over to Joe. I mean, AI went from being understood sort of, and it's cool, we know it's going to make a big change, to bam, it's just like everywhere, ready for prime time. It's like happened like overnight.
Well, the good thing is pushing the technology now, when you really think about, 5 years, 10 years from now, right? It's AI and machine learning before was basic anomaly and pattern recognition. But now having the prevalence that it's coming out with ChatGPT, bringing it to the real world, where this is the first piece where the masses have seen the actual power of what it can do with all of the data that's out there. And I think it was a great move for Microsoft, to get in and contract and kind of get it. But again, the only reason why it can be so powerful is the data that's behind it and what it's been learning from, which is scary. If you guys haven't tried it, you definitely should, because it's amazing the questions that you can ask, everything you can possibly think of. It's quite cool.
Yeah, it's very impressive. And you're right. I mean, training The algorithm is the hard part. I mean, of course, Microsoft had its black eye with an AI chatbot, Tay, that they put on Twitter a few years ago, and it started spewing racial epithets. And they're like, uh-oh, you better take this thing down. They learned the lesson pretty quickly. But hey, man, if you've got the kind of purse strings that Satya Nadella has, might as well pull the trigger on this deal. I'll throw it over to Daasity Dan. I mean, this is a huge change in the world of data management and functionality because, to Joe's point, you can have it do stuff. You can actually, so Software AG is another company we do some work with, and they announced like a week ago that they've interfaced with ChatGPT and it can allow you to use their technology in conjunction with it. This is going to be a really, really big deal because, like I was saying, machine language, machines talking to each other is not as complex as people talking to each other, which means it should be easier for the engine to figure stuff out. But Daasity Dan, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting what you said about the, bringing back the old Microsoft AI on Twitter and how that didn't work, right? Because what we've done with ChatGPT is we've made it something where it's really focused around how do you write, how do you use language, how do you do something that's fairly safe? And so I think one of the things that is going to be interesting as it kind of moves forward is how do you put controls or sort of limits around it? Because you're exactly right. It's like, if you can start having it go on data, you can then go and have it start to make decisions. But then there's parameters and controls. And I'll kind of share a sort of a funny story as a reason why it's like, there's going to have to be the ability for people to still kind of help regulate what it can and can't do. Right. So we had put product on sale. So we decided years ago, this was before at Profilers, we decided to buy these 8-foot Easter bunnies that you could send to your kids with chocolate. Except we didn't really think about the cost of shipping on, because you could only buy online, of actually the freight of shipping an 8-foot high bunny. It was pretty expensive. So we discounted the heck out of those bunnies and we sold all of them we had in stock.
Wow.
A planner didn't realize that we'd put them on stock and saw that these bunnies sold really well. So they bought double the inventory for next year. And so it's like, so it's this kind of like data without some of the business context. And that's what I think is going to be really interesting is we're going to want to let the AI run and make decisions. And we're going to want it to do that because it can do it so much faster. Just think of what financial services, because they're usually the forefront, and what you've got in trading, and that data centers are moving closer to the NYSE because and the NASDAQ, because they get microsecond advantage in trading and how they're moving forward. But they've also spent hundreds of millions of dollars of making sure that they put controls in place so it doesn't do something crazy and you don't suddenly make a trade for $1 billion of money that you may or may not have. And so it's going to be interesting, I think, from our perspective in terms of what does that do for jobs and people and how these systems become a little bit more operationalized.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up a really good point again, which is that the functionality is useless without the data. And you can't build predictive models just out of thin air. You have to be looking at your historical data or your real-time data, for example. And maybe, Joe, I'll throw this one over to you. That's where you folks come in, being able to give rapid access to historical data such that these algorithms can understand the patterns intrinsic in your business, in your inventory, in your sales, in your marketing efforts, whatever it may be. AI needs to be trained to get some model that's going to be useful for you. And then, of course, you have to watch it and match it. And in our podcast bonus segment today, I spoke to a guy from Aria.ai. They have a fantastic explainability and observability platform for predictive models. It's really fascinating. It can explain deep learning modules, all kind of stuff. But the key is to have the data, and that's where a company like Grax comes in, right, Joe?
I mean, that's exactly why. So to protect our customers, our foundation of the company, what we really wanted to do is protect the customer's historical data. Now, when we truly protect it, we say, listen, we're going to take all of your historical data and put it in a cloud that you own. We don't have a multi-tenant cloud that we lock data away, we rent access to, or a closed ecosystem where people pull their historical data via API. Our customers own their entirety of their historical data in their cloud. So although they subscribe to Salesforce and Salesforce has one version of data, our customers have every single version of Salesforce data in their cloud. Now, this gives you optionality in the future. If you think about it, there is not going to be one machine learning or AI model that rules them all. Even ChatGPT is the sexy one in the room right now. There's going to be many that come down the path, but you're going to need your historical data from these sources to train the different models, to back test these different models. And it's going to become more and more prevalent as we kind of move ahead. Much like data visualization, there's many data visualization tools out there. There's many data warehouses, many data analytics, but it really comes down to your historical data. That's really where the power is. And we've seen that prove out based on, if you think of Google, their entire data set that they have about each and every one of us based on search history and buying patterns that they can target, mark to us, and sell to us. That's all based on historical data, right? So it's just proving out now. It's just becoming super interesting to say, okay, wow, how will I operationalize, as Dan was saying, how can I operationalize these tools, but I need my historical data to actually test it and build it and model it. And that's really why, we built Grax from the ground up, thinking of that in the future and protecting our customers' best vision.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I'll bring Dan back in. I'm going to throw a little curveball at you and give you one of my pet peeves, if you will. I've noticed, especially with social media, the data is highly suspect, is what I'll say, especially when you purchase, if you buy some advertising, if you promote your tweet or your Facebook post or your Instagram post or whatever. I mean, the numbers you get, I'm looking at, I'm like, what does this even mean? Like, it goes through the roof in terms of the traction or the visibility, or like on Twitter. And I love Twitter, but on Twitter, they for a long time they were separating out what they call digital expands. That's when you like click on the tweet and the whole tweet comes up. I've never, ever, ever tried to do a digital expand. It's always an accident. So here they are tracking this. Look at all the digital expands. Yeah, those were all accidents, every one of them. But my point is that, somewhere in there is some real signal. Somewhere in there is some information that I can use. But how do you separate the wheat from the chaff in these environments? And I have to believe that a platform like yours over time will enable an intelligence about all that we can basically set coefficients and say, okay, well, if Twitter says it's 1,000 impressions, it was probably 200 decent ones. Do you have that capacity now, or do you kind of see where I'm going with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're 100% true, because, if we go back to we connect to all the big marketing platforms where consumer brands are going to advertise. And you can ask them kind of a funny math question, which is, go tell me what the revenue is from all the ad platforms that they're claiming that they've got, and add it all up and see whether that's your actual revenue.
Wow.
And it's usually going to be 3 or 4x, because we have to remember, what's the reason these platforms exist? They want you as a consumer brand to spend marketing dollars to promote your product. And so as consumers, we don't just see one ad and decide, that's it, I'm in, I'm buying it. Usually it takes several different kind of impressions, or you see it in multiple places. And so what we do is, because we connect to all of them and we know what your real sales are, we can start to say, well, really, the ad platform is telling you X, but it's really kind of Y. That's really what they're generating. And that gives you the ability as a consumer brand to kind of really decide how to allocate that marketing dollars, because you're taking the data from all the different sources, putting it into one place,
right,
and saying, I know the ad platform's not right. I just don't know how not right it is. And that's, you go back to marketing, you go back to the 80s, they used to say in the advertising, they used to say, I don't know. I know I waste 50% of my ad dollars, but I just don't know which 50%. And that is true today, even in the digital space, where we can supposedly track and have all this data, because guess what? That data still doesn't know what I drove by and what ad I saw or who I talked to. It doesn't track my text messages. And a friend told me about it. But we're trying to get there by asking consumers. You have all these pop-ups now. How did you hear about us? And so the more data you can get, the better you can triangulate. You get more information, you get more and more data, the more that you can start to put it in one place and triangulate and get to that true answer.
Yeah, and that's the key. And of course, it's always going to be a moving target, right? I mean, you're going to get closer and closer, and then something changes, and you drift out, and then you work on and get closer and closer, and then something changes. And so we're not going to see too many jobs going away. It's just going to be different jobs. And Joe, but the classic line I heard on one of these shows a few years ago is that it's not so much that AI is going to make jobs disappear. It's that people who don't use AI are going to have a harder time getting and keeping jobs, right?
Well, I mean, if you think of decreasing populations around the world, right? There aren't enough people being produced to repopulate both the United States or China, right? If you think of as the population grows and ages, AI and picking up a lot of these jobs, it's really just going to shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's really going to change. I mean, I really think just like we couldn't think of the world before the internet, right? And how many jobs were created because of the internet and kind of that evolution in kind of the late 90s and spurring that in. All of these new industries are going to spur things that I really believe are going to be game changers and things that we can't even think about today, right? And it's, in my mind, it's super exciting, the possibilities, right? I think, as Dan was saying, though, there's going to be some oops, some mistakes, some, we didn't train it to do this. That's going to happen with anything. I mean, anytime, any kind of knowledge and training, it's unavoidable in my mind.
Yeah, I'll throw it over to Dan. So in your environment, I mean, in like a data warehousing environment, you've got data engineers just trying to do the pipelines and all that kind of stuff. And you got the business analyst, you got all sorts of different experts. Is your system set up to where one person should be able to do all that stuff? Or do you still have sort of separation of concerns across different roles?
For us, I mean, from us building the infrastructure and providing as a service, we do have those two different functions just because the engineer from a technical perspective might be developing in, say, as you were saying earlier, like a C+ or a Ruby or whatever kind of application programming to connect to the APIs. And then you go to more as we're trying to build the insights, and you might do that within a SQL or Python or something along those lines. And so those tend to be a little bit of different sort of skill sets in terms of how we approach that. But when it comes to our customers, so customers using our platform, it's really just an analyst, somebody who's interacting with our platform, enabling them to get the answers that they want. And some of them may be somewhat technical, so know how to write SQL or Python, but you don't have to be. You can be just I want to go answer these questions, and I know how to go build my charts or graphs within the tools, and I know what types of questions I want to ask.
Yeah, that's so cool. And, we've got another company we've done some work with, Alpha Software. They do like a mobile development platform. Basically, they've been around a long time. And I remember telling them this dream that I had just like last year or so. It's like, what I would really like is an app where I can just say, I want an app that accesses my CRM data and then predicts who's going to buy which product next. Go. And like have that whole thing just kind of spin up. As crazy as it sounded a year or two ago, we are on the cusp of having that capability where you just tell the machine to write some application, it just cranks out, and boom, you're off to the races. That's crazy. We'll be right back with our final segment before the podcast bonus segment. Of course, you're listening to DM Radio.
Welcome back to DM Radio. Here's your host, Eric Kavanaugh.
All right, folks, back here on DM Radio, and we're talking to Joe Gaska of Grax and Daasity Dan LeBlanc from Daasity, all about data and how data drives everything these days. And we were just chatting about Twitter in the break there a moment ago. And, I'm thinking to myself, the point that you made earlier, I think you both made it, that data is the corpus upon which all these predictive models are based. And so you look at this massive amount of data and you understand the patterns, the relationships, for example, dependencies, things of this nature, syntax, for example, and then you can apply it somewhere else. And what I think is really interesting here is that there is this ongoing battlefield for the UI. And what I mean is where you are. What do you log into during your job to do stuff or during your personal life? Now, for a while, it was Facebook, and Facebook, of course, was a juggernaut that took off. And then they went down this whole meta pathway, which I kind of view the metaverse as Roblox for adults. I'm not really sure. I mean, I get the long-term benefits they're talking about, but it's like, oh, no, man, you went pretty far off down some rabbit hole here, but we'll see. It might actually pan out. But Twitter is nowhere near as big as Facebook in terms of usage. But we were saying in the break there that Elon Musk's plan is probably to build the WeChat of America, which is like the super app. So it's where you go to learn things, to find stuff, and then to buy things and to trade money and do all sorts of different things. I'll throw it over to Dan to comment on. I mean, data drives everything, and there's a whole heck of a lot of data in Twitter. Now, how much of it you can trust is another matter. Those bots are everywhere. I mean, I learned, if you want to know what these bots look like, I figured out how to do it. I figured out how to trigger them. What you do is you find any sort of controversial topic, like let's say it's something political or some big issue that's sort of a hot button issue. Find someone who's tweeting about it, especially someone with a lot of followers, and just challenge what that person said. And then all of a sudden you'll get all these like rando likes and dislikes and snide comments and supportive comments and all this stuff. And if you look at all the different profiles of these people that just suddenly became interested in your conversation, they all are like following 20 people with 8 followers or following 17 people with 2 followers. You're like, what is this? They're bots. That's what they are. They're bots. In fact, I'll throw one last comment over. Gosh, a couple of years ago, we did a webinar on 5G, and we needed to get more registrants. So I've never advertised on Facebook before, but I decided to go ahead and pay some money just to see if we can get somewhere on this webinar. And I got all these flaming, oh, you're going to kill children and all this stuff. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? And I asked my buddy Ray Wang, who's a pretty smart guy from Constellation Research. He said, yeah, those are Russian bots or Chinese bots. And I was like, really? I said, why would they do that? He said, because they don't want us to get 5G. They want us to be scared of 5G and to stay in 4G, such that we're a whole generation behind China and the rest of the world. I was like, it was one of these aha moments. I was like, oh my God, that actually does make sense. And that's scary as hell. So the deep fake side of this is going to be a real challenge, but Dan, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, it's definitely very true on both sides, right? The more data you have, the better off we're going to be. From I'm trying to, I'll say, manipulate or incent or try and steer, so you can have a very nefarious view of data, or you can have a very good side of data. So and you hear stories about it on either side. So nefarious is exactly what you're saying. Bots trying to go and like or dislike to prove sort of an idea that may be not true for some sort of political gain. Or you could say something like, well, I actually want it to track my data because then I'm more likely to see a product ad that I'm interested in for a site that I've already browsed. And it's really kind of, from a societal perspective, like really interesting, right? But in terms of what you do with that data, because it can be very advantageous in terms of if we get all that data. So think about yourself on your mobile phone, at home, on your Wi-Fi, and now if you have Hulu or something else, hey, guess what? Probably within the next couple of days, you're going to see an ad on TV for that same site that you visited. That's great from an experience and from a brand perspective. And those are things that we help with in terms of, we were talking about advertising earlier, like having all that data from all those different places and bringing it into a platform. We can help you understand how that works. And so it's, I think, very intriguing because of that use. But the more data we get, the more ability to do good things with it. Yet there's also the ability to do more bad things with it.
Yeah, right. No, that's out there, and I'm pretty impressed with the work that OpenAPI has done with ChatGPT. Joe, I'll bring you in sort of building in some guardrails, because if you start throwing weird questions at it, maybe questions that are unseemly, for example, it'll tell you like, "Oh, I really don't want to comment on that," or something like that. I was like, "Wow, look at it go!" So they clearly had a sort of knowledge map or so, or terminology map, where they kind of said, okay, let's watch out for these terms. When people use these, it's probably trying to do something, because there was a concern of bad actors just intentionally trying to cause Chat GPT trouble. They seem to have done a good job of sort of buttressing it against those bad actors. What do you think, Joe?
I mean, just like in humans, right? There has to be something way of training or learning either morality or integrity, right?
Mm-hmm.
And something has to train it, and something has to have guardrails and an expected behavior that we all have to expect, both from humans and computers when we're interacting. I mean, there's a basic premise of just being good people with dealing, but you also have to think of these actors, and there will be bad actors, in the world coming. If you think of one thing that's scary, and you start thinking about, data and history and buying patterns. I'm not a big believer in virtual reality, but you can see the augmented reality if you think in the near future, and people giving suggestive selling based on physical being somewhere. You're
Right.
running you're running a sale, and your sneakers are you need new sneakers. Maybe you should go into the store that's right beside you. You think about, you mentioned WeChat of the US. People today want short bursts of information. That's why the number one way I interact with most of my family is typically over text messages now. It's not even phone calls. It's not even any of those. You're texting back and forth.
Right.
If you think about whether the medium being Twitter or whether it be text messages, and you think of, you know, augmented reality, and it just becomes really scary with you merge all that together with AI and buying, you get some pretty interesting things in the future that's coming. So, as you were saying before, do we think jobs are going away? No, I think there's going to be incredible opportunity both for merging, Dan, your consumer buying and analytics and patterns, and in the physical space, not having to be in your home network browsing, but I'm walking around a mall and someone giving me a suggestion that, hey, don't forget, you need to buy one of these for your wife because her birthday is next Monday. Which,
That's a good suggestion, and I'll throw that over to Dan. I do think that to a large extent, the manifestation of value from AI, which of course is going to be trained on data, it all starts with the data, will be in the form of suggestions, just like Joe said, like, hey, look at this, hey, look at that. And it's very good at that kind of stuff. And I think that's where the value is going to come. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely 100%. Where we have to remember fundamentally is, as Joey's saying, AI is built and really works well off of the historical data. So what it's really good at is figuring out trends that lots of other people are doing and recommending that because a lot of other people have do it, you might do it as well. What it's going to be terrible at is figuring out the new trend.
Right.
So it's not going to predict the next hot new item. It might give you, here's some ideas, but there's always something that comes out of left field that becomes the hot thing. And we're all kind of, where'd that come from? And it'll
Right.
never do a good job of that because it's based on that historical data. So it's going to be perfect for those recommendations and reminders and things about, you like this, so you think you should do that, and trying to help nudge you along. That's where the power is really going to come in.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And so it's not going to be so good at looking forward, but it is going to be very good at noticing what's happening and making suggestions to you about how to capitalize on what's happening, right? So you want to be able to act as trends are rising to buy your new product or to offer you your service or whatever the case may be. And you don't want to be jumping all in as the trend line is going downward. That's the wrong time. But I think you're right about that. Well, let's see, just closing thoughts from, well, we're almost out of time here, but I'll get these guys back on the show. We've been talking to Joe Gaska from Grax, that's Grax, and Dan LeBlanc, aka Daasity Dan. Look these folks up online. Daasity is Daasity, and Grax, like I said, is Grax. Send me an email, folks. We want to know what you want to know. We're booking the rest of the year right now on DM Radio, info@dmradio.biz. That email comes straight to me, and our other show, of course, Inside Analysis, info@insideanalysis.com. We want to know what you want to know. Send me an email. Don't be shy. Let's get you on the show sometime. You, my friends, have been listening to DM Radio.